When it comes to throwing compliments at Battlefield 5, it's not exactly a very easy thing to do. Whether you're a long-term veteran of the franchise, or just a casual player who pops on every now and then for a bit of fun. It's safe to say that this game in particular hasn't exactly had very much love over the past year, for probably 1,000 different reasons. Many people have become bored, frustrated and tired of its ongoing struggle with bugs, crappy new mechanics and overall lack of content, to the point where most of its dedicated fanbase and, well, best community in the world have got fed up and gone back to play the older Battlefield games that came out years ago. Because they're quite simply better games. And with Modern Warfare looming on the horizon, waiting to snatch up whatever's left of the fanbase, Battlefield 5's future is looking pretty dark and very uncertain. Which is a bit of a shame, because the Battlefield franchise has produced some of the coolest FPS experiences in the history of multiplayer shooters. Up until this point in time anyway. Although it's becoming harder and harder for me to be positive about the game, Battlefield 5 does actually do a few things right. Things that can be considered as improvements from past games, that are either better balanced or generally more useful. So I'm going to do something that's pretty rare these days and actually make a positive video about the game, giving a bit of credit where it's due, and dedicate an entire video highlighting a few of the things that Battlefield 5 actually does better than the earlier games that came out before it. Here we go. So in no particular order, one of my personal favourite gadgets, the Scout Flare from Battlefield 1, has thankfully made its return to Battlefield 5. It's one of the most effective scout tools for picking out enemies hiding around objective points, making it a must-have for anyone who cares about playing the objective or locating other players. It was a fantastic thing in Battlefield 1, but it was probably a bit too fantastic. I mean, you could just fire it at the floor, and pretty much everyone on the enemy team nearby would pop up on the minimap and be seen for you and your squad to mow down. It was kinda like activating your own UAV whenever you wanted, or whenever you couldn't find that pesky enemy contesting the objective point. There was no hard counter against this either, unless you were using a certain specialisation that sort of made them less effective when standing still. But otherwise, you were pretty much a sitting duck every time a flare was used, making them extremely effective nearly all the time. DICE probably realised that the flare guns were a bit too good, and they probably realised that realistically, they just didn't make any sense. Because flares in real life aren't shot at the floor to illuminate people behind walls. The function of the flare gun in Battlefield 5 is quite similar, but in a way that's a bit more balanced, easier to counter, and makes a bit more sense from a realistic standpoint. The flares are fired into the air, which briefly hover over an area to reveal enemies within said area, which is a bit more true to life, putting a bit more skill into the aiming and trajectory of the flare itself too. As if the flare doesn't get high enough, it'll cover a smaller area, putting height into the equation. Not to mention the fact that flares can also be shot down from the sky too, making them easier to counter by practically anyone with a gun, so basically everyone. And these new tweaks to the flare gun spotting mechanics generally makes it a better, perhaps slightly less effective, but more balanced gadget as it returns to Battlefield 5. One of the biggest problems the Battlefield franchise has faced over the many years is how to handle those explosives, particularly getting blasted by grenades, which everyone has access to, making them a very common and cheap way to bite the dust. Grenade spam has been a really tricky puzzle for DICE to solve for a long while, and they finally managed to crack that puzzle in Battlefield 5. In the past, you could expect to see whole corridors, rooms and tight objective points to be lit up with a wide array of lethal throwables, from the good old-fashioned frag grenade, to green plumes of gas, to fire, and all sorts of other nasty things that'll easily get you killed. Chances are, if you're playing on a map with lots of choke points and small spaces, like Operation Metro, Locker, or Fort de Vaux to name a few, then you're probably going to fall victim to grenade spam quite a lot. But this was even a problem on some of the larger maps too, which housed its main objectives within small built-up areas. Because if you were capping a flag, taking an MCOM, or simply sat in a building on its own in the middle of nowhere, then you're still a prime target for everyone on the other team to lob their explosives at. Well, Battlefield 5 kinda made grenades a less effective, less reliable source to get easy kills. Because although everyone still has access to them, grenade deaths are far less common than in the past games. For a few reasons. The main reason is because they're just not as powerful. Fuse times are generally longer, making it easier to escape the blast radius, and although they can still do a lot of damage and be really useful in the right situation, throwables aren't really as important as they have been before. Another reason is down to them being far easier to counter too. As in Battlefield 5, if a grenade comes rolling towards you, you can just lob the bloody thing back, or just shoot it when you're out of the blast range, so it's not going to trap you into an area. If anything, it's the other things in the game, like the Piat and the Panzerfaust, that are often seem to be a bit more spammy, rather than the throwables. And with smoke often being a much more useful alternative, with the new revive mechanics and the lack of cover on some of the game's maps, this means that less people are choosing to use those lethals as a result, contributing to less grenade spam. Window mechanics. Yeah, as weird as that sounds, Battlefield 5's got better window mechanics. Remember in Battlefield 1 where you'd run into a house, an enemy would run in after you, trying to hose you down with an automatico, you'd dash upstairs, enter a room, only to get yourself cornered. The automatico guy would run up the stairs, pepper you with bullets, and send you back to the spawn screen. All because you couldn't break every single bloody fragment of a window pane in time to escape the room and dash off to safety. You'd literally need to dissect a window piece by piece with a melee weapon or with bullets first, if you wanted to jump out of it, which costed time, ammo, and just seemed like more effort than it should have been. It was kinda like being a Nazi zombie, trying to slowly bust its way through a window. Not exactly too bad if you were kitted out with a rapid-firing LMG that could just obliterate the window pane in no time at all. But for nearly everyone else, especially scouts and medics, windows were often a bit of an obstacle that slowed down the flow of the gameplay. Battlefield 5's newer, in my opinion improved window mechanics allow you to quickly vault straight through them without having to take them apart piece by piece first, allowing you to traverse around the map much easier, enter and exit buildings from strategic points to cut players off, or escape from dangerous situations, without getting blocked by a seemingly indestructible pane of glass. You can quite simply just dive your way through the windows, even if they're still fully formed. It might seem like a very small detail that doesn't spring to mind immediately when looking at improved gameplay mechanics, but it's still a much welcomed improvement to what we've seen in the past nevertheless, helping to keep the action flowing and helping to give players easier access to and from buildings. Now this is a bit of a controversial one, because probably quite a few people are going to disagree with me here on whether this is an improvement. Battlefield 5 has a lot of animations for doing different things, and a lot of them are janky, break the flow of the gameplay, and can often just seem a bit unnecessary. They take control away from the player at the expense of trying to seem more immersive and realistic. And they're practically everywhere in the game, from reviving to stabbing enemies, to building fortifications, to climbing over walls and obstacles, and so on. Some of these things had animations in past games, like melee executions and bayonet charges, but generally in the past, you could do the majority of things with an almost instant effect, without being hit in the face with a lengthy animation that slowed down the pacing of the game, which could often get you killed. But there's one specific animation that I can completely understand, the one where you have to enter and exit vehicles. It might seem like a really annoying thing, especially for anyone who mains vehicles and often gets caught out when using them, but I found that in the past games, it was way too easy to avoid death by simply just teleporting out of a tank or plane just as it's about to go boom, denying the attacker of a kill that should have stood, and giving the retreater a coward's way out. Players can still abandon a vehicle if they think they're not going to survive a fight, but things are a little bit fairer now, in the sense that they have to decide whether to jump out of that vehicle earlier rather than utilising its power till the very end, cutting down their chances of survival as a trade-off. The same thing goes for entering vehicles too, as in the past, an enemy with low health might scurry off to the safety of a nearby allied tank, teleporting into it to essentially give that player complete cover from all angles. With the exception of Battlefield 1, which did actually have a few, albeit quick animations, for opening the hatches and entering the vehicles. I think the decision to include these sorts of animations in the game is a good thing, because it does add a further element of realism, and at the same time, it puts more pressure on the vehicle players to hit their targets, play more carefully, and generally try not to get caught out. There's nothing more annoying than sneaking around an unsuspecting tank, plastering the arse end of that tank with dynamite, only for the tank driver to just pop out of nowhere and gun you down, before you had the chance to detonate that dynamite. Last but not least is the health and ammo crates, which weren't exactly super useful when the game first launched, but are now in a position that actually makes them a tad better than their counterparts in some of the previous games. Mechanically, they function in a very similar way to how they did in the past, supplying health and ammo from an aura to anyone within range. But this time around, players can also manually interact with the crates, which they couldn't really do in the past, adding more depth to the gadget itself. Before, you'd just throw one down and watch the points rack up as the guys stood nearby got their health and ammo replenished. Nice and easy. Well, now they do a similar sort of thing, because if you stand within a 4-meter radius, it's going to have the same effect. But it's no longer just a throwable, as you can actually chase your teammates down while holding the crates to resupply them, turning yourself into a portable supply station for nearby allies. Though the good old-fashioned way of chucking them down on the floor is still a viable option, of course. Not only are the ammo and med crates more dynamic in this sense, but they also provide extra stuff if you choose to interact with them, as players can now run up to the crates themselves and pick up an ammo or med pack, resupplying their gadgets or giving them some bandages which can be used on the go. This gives the crates more functionality and improves upon what they could do in the past, as although they generally had the same purpose, to simply restock low ammo supplies and grant some health to wounded players, these slight tweaks to the crate's mechanics give them more potential to be used in different ways. Not to mention the fact that the ammo crates no longer supply players with grenades like they have done in past games, helping to cut down that grenade spam, as we talked about earlier in the video, which is a pretty good move forward, in my honest opinion. So these are a few nice improvements to some of the things that already existed in the Battlefield franchise, which I think Battlefield 5 actually does better, making them seem more functional in terms of gameplay and balance. If there's some other things you can think of that's been improved in Battlefield 5 from earlier games, feel free to share them down below in the comments. But that's pretty much it for this one, folks. Hope you enjoyed the video, give me a like if you did, and subscribe for more content coming up in the future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in that next episode.